Is that what you're saying?
Shenanigans. Stop the shenanigans, Matt.
All right, David, it's preparing. So once it's good to go, I'll give you the go ahead. Danny's going to start the meeting and then pass it off.
Oh, we need a quorum, right? Do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we're good. Oh, Josie's here. Hey. You don't reply to my emails.
I actually was on a meeting with the exec board with Ms. Nichols yesterday, and we are finding one collectively, a new representative. So
Okay.
Got the team working on that.
Okay.
Sorry I didn't answer you. I was doing it, but.
So, yeah.
Okay, we are ready to go, Danny.
Okay. All right, guys, we're going to call this meeting to order, and I'm going to pass it off to David.
David, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much. So, hello, everybody. So you've got the agenda, right? I wanted to just, before we dive into the detail on the agenda, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on the kind of workflow, because there was a couple of things we've added to the table of contents in the project since we last talked, or one major thing, and I wanted to just share that with you. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I can, good. So do you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the table of contents. What I wanted to point out, so we've been working, and we're all obviously almost complete on the chapter 1, which is the future trend shaping the parks and recreation. And then we were moving into essentially what was going to be this sort of evaluation and assessment. But we've split and added this extra chapter here, which was the community needs assessment. So as we started to get into it, as Carissa and Future IQ and her team and our team started to work together, we realized that we wanted to have a little bit of extra depth in terms of trying to understand what the community is looking for in the future, but then also this assessment and evaluation of what's currently there, right? So this breaks this out a little bit, and we've added some more content to the community needs assessment, which I'm going to talk about in terms of the community survey we'll do. But then the chapters 4, 5, and 6 and so on, they're all the same as they were, right? So we basically inserted an extra piece in there because we wanted to make sure we really were asking the community about what in the community's mind does this distributed recreation look like? Where do people want things, and how do they want this to evolve over time? So we're putting a little bit more depth into that. In terms of work plan, I just want to go through this with you. So this is kind of more the operational side with Matt and co, but I wanted to give you a sort of an overview of it. So the work we've done to date, so we obviously have sort of kicked it off. We've done a lot of this background work, so the future public spaces. So we have a pretty extensive draft of that chapter. We've been going through compiling the data from the comp plan. Last meeting we talked about the white paper and basically got the sign off on that, and we've just made a few little tweaks on that. So that's sort of the front load piece. And then Carissa and her team have been doing the existing asset assessment. So she'll talk about that tonight, but that's really been the sort of heavy lift for January. So that's the sort of work plan to date. And then what's coming up. And we're sort of been waiting for the sort of all the assessment pieces to fall into place, which they're really right at that point now, and you'll get a chance to see that tonight. But then that sets us up to be able to really do this community exploration about needs assessment. And I want to talk about that when we get to the survey part. So that'll run through February. That'll push the initial 10-year concept plan to February, March. We were probably ambitious to try and get it all done in February anyway, but that'll spill over into March now. So these two will run in parallel a little bit. And then obviously the modelling piece sort of looks at what it costs to roll out the plan. So we're back on track by the end of March, right? Because we're sort of delayed this a little bit, and we're sort of inserting some extra community engagement in that, right? So that's the future plan going ahead. Slight sort of delay on this, but it doesn't really impact the endpoint here. And it was really because I think it was because we didn't have it really in focus in our minds about what were the questions we really wanted to explore with the community. We could have asked a whole bunch of questions, right? but we just want to ask the things that are really important to shape the concept plan. And I think we're at that point. We want to sort of test some of our thinking and approaches with you tonight. So any questions on that before I hand it back to Carissa for the next part? Okay. All right. Well, that's good. I'll stop sharing. So I just want to give you that sort of front load there. So Carissa and Joel, you guys are on there, I see. Do you want to pick up the first big agenda item here, which is the initial system evaluation and assessment?
We certainly can. We're having some technical difficulties. Are you hearing me twice?
No, just once.
Okay. For some reason, our input and output audio is not working. So I've got our screen up, but I've got, you're looking at my ceiling, but I'm using my phone. All right. I know Matt was able to send out to everyone the maps that we have, but we're going to share our screen as well. There's going to be some detail that might be a little bit challenging to see, but I want to start first with the level of service map. So Joel and I were able to come to town on Tuesday, the 19th, and we felt very fortunate. We were able to catch Chuck and Cynthia and Matt and Brittany and Jack. Right? We got everybody that we needed to have a really good conversation about what we were seeing in the community with our maps, and then really ground truth that, and even advance the conversation further. So can you guys see my screen, the level of service map here? The nice circles.
Yes.
I'll just walk you through that a little bit. So by locating the parks on the map and using the park classifications, we can determine which populations are being covered by the recreational assets that you currently have. Obviously, from our previous discussions, this is based on the size of the parks, the capacity that they have for the numbers of people, the amenities, and those program elements that are included. So what you can see here is that the shaded populations are the ones that are being serviced by the parks that you have currently. And again, I want to just reiterate that this is current, or this is existing conditions, right? This is where you are now. Smith's Fork Park, because it has so many assets and so much acreage, we're really looking at it as drawing from a 1 hour radius. So it covers obviously Smithville and then some. So that's the green shading that you see over everything. The entire population is covered by that park. Then we can go down to these neighborhood parks that we have up north. Wildflower Park. You can see the little blue shading areas. Those are the neighborhood parks. We look at those as a half a mile radius around those parks. Then we can move down to the community level parks. Heritage Park is a community level park. So it's the red circle that you see there that's shaded. That covers downtown. You've got these specialty parks in that area. You've got a neighborhood park in that area. So we're double, triple and up there around the heart of town, which is pretty typical. And then you can see, because Emerald Ridge is such a small, it really should be a neighborhood classification, but it's such a small piece of property with limited assets that it's really got an even smaller radius of just a quarter of a mile there for that. So when we put these together on a map, you can see that there's quite a bit of the population that isn't being served in the capacity that we are wanting, especially when we think about this distributed recreation. We can improve this as we move forward in a variety of ways. You can, the most simply is to add program elements to existing park properties that you have, and you can gain some level of service in that capacity. It isn't, completely effective. As we know, Emerald Ridge only has so much room to do so much stuff. So that's just one example. You could add land to existing parks if there's the ability to purchase or have donated to you some additional properties to add some amenities. And then lastly, and most costly and longer term is looking at acquiring property and developing it, and or through donation, looking at that. So when we look at this map, north of downtown and the community park service radius, we know there's quite a few large lots, single landowners there that make that a challenging area to serve. But we're really thinking about Wildflower Park and it being undeveloped at this point in time, what that becomes, and if there's some capacity to add some acreage to that, really could get that to that community level of service. And that's what's being shown in that magenta dashed circle there. And that really does take care of a nice part of the population, part of the community there. Likewise, as we look south of downtown, south of Route 92, really concentrating on this area as future development. We know that more housing is going to come online in that area as well, but future looking, thinking about what properties could be acquired or have donated to be developed for park property at the community level scale to really take care of the southern part of the community. Are there any questions about that? All right. Joel, can you move us to our asset map? So of course we consider parks an asset, and we've got those on the map. Those were the first ones to go on. But as we consider distributed recreation and connectivity throughout the community, we really want to look at where the populations are and where the populations want to go and where they need to go. So this map really, we were looking at private services like hospitals, grocery stores. We add public schools on here. They are considered an asset for a variety of reasons. You've got a concentration of students that need to be accessing that location, but also they have amenities, the playgrounds and sports fields and those kinds of things that add to any park system. We've got the public services, the library, city hall, post office, and then we've got the assets that are outside of Smithville, which you're blessed with the county property and have trailheads, a lot of trail connectivity, some parks and playgrounds that the county provides. We've included those on this map as well. And then as we look at our conversations that we've had about the economy and how the park system and the connectivity can drive economy, we wanted to tie in the tourism and attractions. And so that you can see those on this map as well, including the winery and the berry farm, the museum, and your new event venue that we had the opportunity to tour the property of at White Iron Ridge, which is beautiful. This map here, then we use this as we start looking at the connections that we can make. I would look for input from you all if there's something that you feel should be on this map that isn't. We would certainly be happy to update that. And you don't have to tell us now, but if you want to mark something up there and Matt can get it sent to us. Are there any questions about this map? Anything glaring that's missing?
And Carissa, the goal for the asset map is one to make sure that if we do have, we want easy access to all these, in the future, correct? Correct.
That is the goal.
Yeah, and Matt, can I just sort of add to that too? And Krista, is that this is the sort of, we'll talk about the community survey, right? But this is the underlying kind of what have we got to play with currently, right? And then as we go into the concept plan, and the survey sort of helps inform that, we're sort of going to be asking, how do we want all these pieces to fit together, right? And how do you want, people to be able to move between them, and what sort of purpose and theme should each property have, and what's the best function of it, right? Because at the moment, it's, I don't know, I might be a bit wrong, but it occurs to me like that you've got this bunch of little assets, but there's no real connectivity or kind of master plan to them, right? Which is the point of doing a master plan, obviously, right? But the first point, obviously, is this base mapping. And I think it's really nice the way, Chris, here in your sort of narrative, you're sort of tying where are people and where are people going, and how does that connect to these resources? Because, you know, thinking about that, you know, the social infrastructure of the school and where people go shopping and so on, that becomes I think that's going to become a really key part of the story about how people move around the community. So, so we'll talk more about this as well once we get into the survey piece. Just wanted to add that, Chris.
Thank you
Yes,
very
so-
much.
So one thing I'd like to see added under the private piece of this is the private subdivision pools and trails. Just so as we're looking across the community, if somebody says, hey, we need a community pool, and we look and see there's 10 subdivisions that already have pools. If you're already there's already a service level from the subdivision. I'd just like to see it listed on these
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
That's an excellent observation. We did talk about that.
Because even you know, like we have a lot of trail around our subdivision, and then I don't see. Yeah. So yeah, if we could just get those added on there, that'd be good.
Thank you.
And then one other thing we might want to add under private is the because we have the schools. Do we have churches on here? Because in the private school, because I know, Matt, you use the churches sometimes too or looked at them for basketball or whatever.
Yeah, we did have that conversation briefly, but I guess we didn't arrive at a conclusion. There is, the churches in Smithville seem to have property, additional property or more property than their building currently sits, which could be taken advantage of if they have plans for, church softball leagues or those kinds of things. There could be some collaboration that happens there.
Yeah, because I know Grace has already presented a plan to us on trail amenity on their property, gazebo and such as a place to sit. So that's something the city wouldn't have to, worry about as much on that piece of the trail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris,
Adding a trail around their property as well. So
Joel, just a request, can you scroll the screen so that it sits more over the downtown? Because that's kind of where all the action is, right?
Sure.
Yeah, just like that. No, not so, well, yeah, that'll do. But just because I think this is where the concentration is, because this is, I think, the reference for those type of things like the mayor's talking about, that other pieces that might come into play.
and do we have
the
city property? Do we have the city property on that asset map too that the city
Yeah, that's
like
just what I was going to suggest. There's that piece, isn't it? The new piece across 169.
Yeah. The 8 acres we have there.
Yeah.
7 foot, whatever.
Okay. Very good. Others?
This may sound odd, but I know we now have a dispensary here, and that will draw traffic as well. So I don't know if that should be listed on here as a private asset.
It's private business. I don't think it's gonna.
But so are the gyms that are listed.
Yeah, we have grocery store on there, but yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just a question on this, is who the land ownership between Heritage Park and Smith Fork Park on each side of the creek or the river there, who owns that, the floodplain?
Most of it's one owner now.
It's
And
Owens.
yeah, and I think as part, and that's one of the things I was going to ask too, and this might be something you guys can get from Jack. We did, as part of that development agreement, we also got trail easement, I believe, between
Yes.
Maple and Smith Fork.
Yeah, it was Gene Owen came by and talked with us. It's been two and a half years probably about some kind of donation there, right outside Smith's Fork.
Yeah, and then so there's subdivisions. If you scroll up just a little bit, right there across from 18, you see that road that goes on the north side of 18 there. So where that line is, that there to the green, that right there, I think is where the trail easement is, to be on that side of the river as well.
Okay.
Because
Maybe-
then we could extend that trail, because and also the single track's not on there, Matt. The 3.5 miles of hiking single track that's right there in Eagle that you guys have. in Smith's Fork on the other side of the river, because there's that trail that goes along the river there to the edge of, part of that property. And then we also have some piece of road on the north side, but there's 3.5 miles of trail inside of there as well, north of the river and inside of Smith's Fork. So there's a trailhead there that I'd like, that we could, that probably is on the trail map, is it? I don't know.
Yeah, we're gonna flip to the trail map. Yeah.
It's not on the trail map either, though.
Okay. Let's see.
Chris, you have the trail map now?
Yes, please.
Where are we here? I'm gonna zoom in that central area. That sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that top quarter quadrant, the northeast side of Smith's Fork, there's 3 miles of trail in there as well. And that's why we have that easement along there as part of the development agreement.
Yeah, that would be Lake Remote there, Joel,
Yeah.
the one we walked.
Oh, yeah.
Lake Remote's not on the map either. It's okay. I mean, I'm just calling out if we can get, because if you look at on the north side where we have future trail, we have kind of something documented there.
Yeah. That's a matter of getting a hold of the data.
Yep.
The county
Yeah.
has some good data.
Yeah, I know. I think Matt has a map of Smith's Fork trails.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can lay underneath the aerial and
Yeah.
trace it.
Or just take that purple line across there too, east to west.
Yeah.
Further down.
Oh.
Right there, right above the river, just north of the river, where right there across that from the green to the white, that is trail easement.
Okay. We will work on getting that.
That's a short, quick trail type of thing that we could do, because on the core property, it's already kind of graveled in, but anyway.
Yeah.
And I ride the purple area quite a bit that you have north and west of that. So yes, I would love a trail in there.
Excellent. So yes, obviously, as we were talking about this, the connectivity map, we've got it up now. And the goal is to connect the community together with a network of trails. And we looked at everything from, off-street, off-road, on-street, the share road type system, and then trails.
Yeah.
So this only continues to strengthen that social network, the distributed recreation concept. We were very pleasantly surprised. Smithville has a lot of opportunities that we don't always see in communities. The Metro Green Trail system and network definitely, extends beyond what Smithville has to do in order to connect to the region, which is wonderful. And has assets with the trailheads that are close off of County Road and some of those others with just some key connections. So the other thing, go ahead.
Sorry, Danny's internet had dropped. So one of the things she mentioned along with the pools and like Hills of Shannon doesn't have a pool, but they have a playground and a pond and trail there. So just when we're labeling those private ones, Harbor View has a pool, playground, and shelter house.
The pool I wasn't as worried about as much, just because it's fenced and private and no one can get in except our, but the playground, I know I think some kids come over from Greyhawk and use it, and I know some folks come down from Wildflower and use the playground and that kind of thing. So
the only reason I mentioned the pools, Danny, is if it comes to the point where people start asking about pools and we show that we're over half the subdivisions have them, and we wouldn't put one in the north, right? Because all of the anyway. Yeah,
that was
exactly. But yeah, the dog park is an asset now too that you can add in, but that's part of that trailhead.
Very good.
Well, can we add it yet?
It exists, Danny. It's not open, but it exists.
It exists.
I was going to ask, and I just saw it in the chat. Is the dog park listed on there?
No, that's what we were just talking about.
We did talk about it at the meeting, and I believe we wrote it down for sure.
We will get that added.
It's going to be a small, tiny little, dot right there in that corner, but it's pretty much that corner that you have. So where that red trail is off of Flitton Way.
We will, yes. Maybe we were just thinking we'll believe it when we see it. So we just didn't. No.
I jump the fence and run around in it. I don't have a dog, but you know.
We'll get that added.
But Teresa, we may need to think about a sort of a category for these type of things, because I think, you know, and Danny was sort of pointing to it, there's probably a fine line here about calling out what are essentially private assets on a sort of a park and rec sort of plan. So maybe we need to call them something like, you know, shared private assets or, you know, facilities, so that people don't think that they're public facilities, right? So we don't want to kind of
Yeah,
with that.
That's why it would be part of it. Like when we're looking at levels of service, right? Like that's where I would categorize those, is maybe even just as an appendix. It doesn't need to be on these maps probably, but
okay.
Throw it at the end so that as the Parks Board and others are looking at this to make decisions, we can say, well, we've got 4 pools north of downtown already that are servicing those neighborhoods. Do we need another?
Yeah, and we had those conversations internally with Jack as well, thinking that same thing, especially as we were looking at the lack of proposed amenities really on the west side of 169, that the subdivisions that are going in there do have, you know, the homeowners association grounds.
Yeah. Can you scroll down a little bit? Because one thing I wanted to look at too, as we're talking, because Metro Greenway is a ways out, right? As we're talking about future trail connectivity, really connecting that Liberty to Hills of Shannon, you know, that purple where White Iron Ridge is right there, we could go from Hills of Shannon across that property. I've talked to her quite a bit, but we could look at doing a potential trail across there that makes a better connector than along the creek. That's property that is private right now, right? So they're already an event space. They're going to have people going through there. They want to encourage traffic through there.
Okay.
And that connects Hills of Shannon. You know, if you look at that diagonal line right there, that connects Hills of Shannon to Liberty, if we can get some way to get over to that section of Liberty. Because if you look to the east of that, those are all private residences now.
So Mayor, I wanted to test something with you too, and Matt, you sort of weigh in on this as well, is that one of the things we've been talking about in the sort of the Parks and Trails master plan, right, is this concept of green spaces and where that fits in, which are not necessarily specifically parks or city property, but they're perhaps part of the resource that becomes part of the environmental story. So, for example, we've started a discussion with Jack about the riparian kind of zones, right, and having some sort of buffers around those, which can also then have, you know, trail components built in as part of the land use components. And one of the things we want to kind of test is how important is this sort of environmental overlay, because in an environmental kind of landscape, you want to be looking at sort of connectivity, like corridors for wildlife and things, to, you know, some continuity, right? And so a lot of where those metro trails go, for example, is, you know, suits that purpose really well. But do we want to think about sort of calling that out? Because if you were to do like an overlay of sort of green space, sort of environmental corridors on this, it would look quite different to the sort of polygon land use application, right? So is that something we should be thinking about? Because I know, and I don't think we've kind of really finalized it, did we, Matt, in terms of talking about how far sideways we go into that sort of green space component. But it does come out obviously in the sort of forward-looking stuff, because the environmental aspects were really important to people. And then you've got floodplains, you've got all these other sort of components that it's a different dimension to just this sort of straight up sort of almost land use type of component. Any sort of guidance or thoughts on that?
I personally think it would be good, David, to identify those, especially when you're talking about corridors that would have trail or usability, but also would serve as wildlife corridors, because as development increases, wildlife definitely it needs a place to go. And that's where I think it'd be good to kind of establish some of that, because you're right, the environmental considerations were pretty big in the visioning process for a lot of people.
Right. And if you look at some of those, especially right there along Metro Green, on the south of 92, a lot of those properties that are in city limits, they're not going to be subdivided any further because they don't have any road access other than the one. And we don't allow for split entry type of stuff into one property unless it's a subdivision. And those are zoned agricultural, or so those are going to stay pretty green, right? So we don't need to go find another 100 acres across the street to have more green space. And everything around the lake is going to stay green space. So especially from, you know, the downtown south along, other than the school, you're not going to get much density there. You see that giant white space next to Hills of Shannon and the purple. I mean, that's one property owner. They're probably not going to develop it anytime soon. So they're in all those properties right there. You can see how the city boundaries are pretty funky right there.
Yeah.
Even that purple was out of city limits until recently, right? We annexed that in. And you've got right there along that one road, you've got all these county properties as well. So that's gonna be the more difficult piece to get connected in. The north side, we have better options because we've got highway right of ways and things like that. But
Okay.
the other thing I was talking to Matt about the other day, I know you guys had talked about, you know, where does stuff fit and if we have the space for it. Even if we look at property west of the city limits along KK Highway, even a mile outside of city limits on KK is closer to downtown than where I live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I'm 5 miles north of downtown, right? So if you go half mile, 1 mile out on KK and find land there that's available, you're still closer to downtown, and you've got that, you know, Platte River Metro Trail going that way, and it there's more availability of land there than within city limits right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there even a time frame for any portion of some of those metro trails?
I think they developed that plan 30 years ago.
Yeah.
25 years ago, something like that. I mean, it takes, so you see our boundary, you can see on our boundary there where we hit Platte County, we have a little overlap into Platte County, but Platte City hasn't gone to their eastern boundary with trails, right? So getting a lot of this, we got to get Clay County to get involved with. Clay County would love to have it all hub into Hodge Park, but there you get Kansas City and others that are going to, you know, potentially have some land to get that going. But, you know, we got to get under 92, you know, 5 Corners possibly, and then somewhere else. But that whole thing is part of, you know, connecting Liberty and
Sure.
Springs and Kearney and everybody that's in Clay County into Hodge Park.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as 92 highway gets developed, I would make sure that part of that development plan includes trail or trail crossings. But then, you know, with the creeks and stuff, because the Metro Greenway is pretty much following the creeks. If you look at it, it follows creeks. The way creek ownership works is you own to the middle of it. Property owner owns to the middle of the waterway. So even if the city has half of it, the other property owner has the other half. But yeah, ideally, if we could get Hills of Shannon connected, that gives us, you know, Hills of Shannon connected into Liberty, everything else connected into that downtown, that gets us a good portion of the population.
Yeah.
And Mayor, we just put in those new sidewalks too, right across from Hills of Shannon, correct? That
yeah,
basically from
that's basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering why we had the purple trail going from the school to downtown. That's our future mark project, but not the actual sidewalks that we already put in all the way to Hills of Shannon, because they're 6 feet wide as well, right? So
yeah, and Joel and Chris, so basically where that purple dot stops there at the school district, it comes all the way north to Hills of Shannon.
South of that curve.
And I know we talked about that. I think that
we
was
did
on the map. So yeah.
Yeah, we were trying to distinguish kind of, do we want to do trails or like, you know, trails next to the road, sidewalks and things like that? What would, you know, go into this map? And that's what we couldn't really agree on just yet.
Yeah,
because there's so many sidewalks, you know.
Yeah, and even you know, it'd be even to, you know, looking at 92 and where things are lined up, even if we could take a trail along the west side or the east side of the school's property to get to 92, because they have a pretty good visibility crossing there. and then you cross it there and go down 92 if you get, to get over to the part through Hills of Shannon. That gives you a good path, because that Liberty Tillman intersection, that whole thing is very funky and going to be very. You've got private landowners. The same landowner, I think, owns both the north and south side of 92 there. That's all that white space with no houses on it. I'd love to get some trails across it, but it's cornfields. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially if you have tractors rolling across it. I mean, it happens on the Katy Trail. You see, I mean, they cross the fields, but that's gravel and.
So how does something on the east side of the school work, Mayor? Would that be the school kind of provides a right of way or an easement there?
Yeah, or they construct it and we contribute to it. We did an MOU with Eagle Heights to do some crosswalk and trail there. So I think that's more doable than trying to come across some of these private property pieces. Cynthia, what's your opinion?
I think I understand the issues of the private property. I think it'll depend on those conversations with the school district and what type of trail we look at, because we talk about up at Eagle Heights, it's a trail, but it is a wide sidewalk, and that's the discussion that we had on South Commercial also, is that how do we classify those? We've created them as connectivity, but they're not true trails.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about from a crossability, visibility standpoint at Eagle, that 92 entry into the high school campus is way more developed and visible and a slower speed limit than once you get down into Tillman, Liberty.
Yes.
You're 50, yeah, you know what I mean? It's that Liberty Street is hard to even turn onto if you're going east.
Yeah. Yes.
Overall connectivity coming up from Kansas City, though, the thing that's going to get closest, quickest is along Woodland, where they're redoing the whole parkway there, and I think eventually that is going to come all the way to 435.
Oh yeah, well, they come all the way to the border. They have 132nd Street, and I love if we can't get 132nd open as a road, that'd be a great trail too. Because 132nd Street was a road at one point. The bridge fell down. So it's already a right of way there, right? And that's when Kansas City could connect across as well. So Kansas City comes all the way to 132nd on our south border. So I foresee them building all the way to that subdivision down there. They have 200 feet north of the 132nd Street. So they go almost all the way to that.
The Forest Oaks?
The Forest Oaks, yeah.
That's right across from my front door, so.
Yeah. So yeah, I think they'll come up that far, and then it's up to us to get it from there on. So that's where, but part of that road is the problem with Virginia. That part of that is county road.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yep. It drops off right after Amory, I think.
Yeah, Amory North to 144th, then we have a piece of 144th and part of Tillman, some of Tillman. You can tell by the boundaries. I mean, look at that. You got like properties that are zigzagged in, and on that dark black line on the south that's all city limits stuff, right? So that's
yeah.
You can see the little pockets. The one pocket on the south there to 132nd, that's the sewer plant by Forest Oaks.
Right.
Kansas city limits.
That one right across from the entrance that is in the city limits is my property. And my neighbors, none of my neighbors are in the city limits.
Well, behind you they are, it looks like, but yeah, the other one.
Yeah. Yep.
But great map. I think we could.
Yeah.
Hey, Joel, could you scroll to the very top where Diamond Crest was and W Highway? Right there, yeah. This was an area we got pretty excited about too, thinking about connectivity on the north side.
Yeah.
So just thinking.
So where's the tunnel going to go to get, are we going to tunnel underneath W there? Or are we going to do a roundabout?
Yeah, it was nice. Just going, the fact that you can go to W to a couple more trails of county, plus our splash pad to the elementary, Eagle Heights there, and to Wildflower, all in this little corridor.
Yeah, I know when Jack and I turned Jack drew this out and we kind of gave it to the school. We were looking at that one that connects, Clay Creek, because you've got Diamond Crest, but not Clay Creek on there.
Diamond Crest are Clay Creek.
Clay Creek should be north of Lake Meadows, on the other side of your green space, right there.
Oh yeah, probably just where those apartments are and everything like that.
They're
townhomes.
Townhouses.
So, yeah.
But yeah, that connects 3 subdivisions plus two. So if you go that curve right there, you're connecting 4 subdivisions. If you come along Old F Highway, you're only connecting 2.
Yep.
So that's why we're working on, connecting trade winds to Lake Meadows, because that all was supposed to be developed into one big subdivision. The other thing right there where the Catholic Church is at the corner of 169 and W, which that should be in city limits, and Rock Creek should be in city limits. Anyway, I see the boundary. Herzog's going in there and they're going to be putting in their sidewalk along 180th.
Is that
188? Yeah. What's up, Emma?
Yeah, just some more connectivity to go from north to south.
Yeah, no, the north-south connectivity is fantastic. And then I know the county at one point talked about doing a bridge, a pedestrian bridge across W, bolt on or something like that to get us across those trails.
Yeah.
Because that W 188th, the W trail right there, I ride that a lot. I would love that to be more open to W because it's got a gate on it, wire gate.
Is that down there? Okay. Well, that's great. So the one thing that we did notice, the things that we were pleased about, obviously, is the Metro Green. And talking with Jack, we understand that you're blessed with right of way outside the roadway, which doesn't always happen. So that does make it easier when you start looking at some of these things and being able to keep it off the road versus the shared bike lanes.
Yeah.
And we also had some good conversation about the cooperation that might exist for some easements to be able to make some easier connections. Mayor, you mentioned that as well. So some of the challenges I think we see in this is the topography. You do have some topography, so that does make for more expensive construction of trails. Typically, if you have to have some walls or you have to do extensive grading. Highway 169 is a challenge as we look at connectivity, of course, and we know that there are some segments, and we don't have these drawn on here just yet, but that are along Highway 169. But I think most of us were in agreement that that's not the ideal situation or circumstance to be riding. So, and then we've also talked about the crossings at Route 92 being a challenge. But you can see from the map what we were shooting for is that strong connectivity north to south off of 169 highway, and that looks to be pretty achievable.
Yeah, I foresee that bridge at Liberty Street being, it's a pretty old bridge. I foresee that need to be replaced in the future, and that could turn into a great pedestrian bridge where we just build alongside of it.
Yeah, that's true too. So
and the bike lane on 169 is not ideal, especially since they put giant grates inside the bike lane part of it.
Yeah, not ideal. But then I think it's just going to come down to the prioritization of segments, which is easier than probably determining prioritization between the connectivity first and the community or the park assets second, or do we build the park assets and with the connectivity to follow? But that's for future conversations.
Yeah, well, we also have a comprehensive plan and strategic plan that kind of outlines that for us and tells us that the Oasis zone in the north is priority and trails are higher priority than some of the other stuff. So I wonder who put that together. Anybody that helped us with that? That's our roadmap to line up to this, right? So if we say we're going to do trails in the oasis. The oasis is where we want the connectivity, right? And that's kind of our priority versus no man's land along Liberty Street. I feel completely safe riding along Liberty Street. It's one of the lowest traffic streets we have. It's got good visibility. It's a good share opportunity. It's really that W highway to the schools and getting the schools and parks connected for the actual residential zones. Because if you scroll up around Eagle Heights, we're adding, right now, it looks like we're probably going to be adding around 1,200 houses around Eagle Heights in the near future, compared to in the south zone where Hills of Shannon, they took 280 potential houses down to 7. So when we're going to be talking density and connectivity, we want that north of the downtown zone is where the oasis is, based on our comp plan and strategic plan.
Certainly. Yep. Well, this is great discussion. We'll continue to refine these. We've got some things that we're working on moving forward, as David had mentioned. But I want David to have time to talk about the survey, because that's the next really exciting piece.
Yeah, so just before we, Joel, don't take the map off. Could you just sort of make the community oasis area more prominent in the middle? So that's sort of the downtown area. So yeah, back out just a little bit to include the school.
A little bit closer.
Oh, out.
Oh, out.
So a bit further out, yeah.
Tell me when.
Get the school. Yeah.
There we go. Right. So one of the things we've been talking about, and this kind of tees it up for the survey, right? But I wanted to kind of give you got a bit of a sense of some of the ideas we've been kicking around in terms of how a concept plan might turn out. And I wanted to really pick up what the mayor was talking about, was that because this, in the comp plan, this area here really is where the action is, right? So that's it's the downtown, it's the potential sort of river walk component. There's, the idea of potential connectivity across the river. There's the connectivity whichever way it goes out to Smith Fork Park and this trail. But what we were also talking about was this notion of people being able to get to major recreation facilities like parks and those sort of assets and walk or make easy connection to them. And the other area, which just to tee this up when we get in the survey, we wanted to talk about down around the school area as another kind of key mode of social infrastructure. So it was very interesting, Mayor, you're talking about like a trail that sort of goes down essentially here, because we were looking at how does this area perhaps tie into the downtown, but maybe through this sort of side corridor here, as opposed to just down the sidewalk on this side, right? So that's the sort of kind of noodling we've been doing, right? And we wanted to test some of this in terms of the community survey. So I'm going to just share. Can you stop sharing your screen, Joel? And I'll. Great. And then I'll share mine. And I just want to talk to you a bit about, and we were sort of seeking your input into this, right? So, I want to tee this up, and Cynthia, there's going to be a point here where I'm going to ask you to just sort of weigh in on some of the deliberations we were having on Friday, because I think some of those are relevant, but just as a heads up. So the Community Future Needs Assessment is this chapter that we've inserted, right? And it really is the vehicle to get to a lot of the content of this. It's some of the work we've done through the white paper, but also the community survey that we want to sort of get rolling next week. So there's 4 parts in that we've flagged. So one is this high level guiding principles, which we'll talk about. Then there's this notion of if we're going to have distributed recreation, it kind of leads us to this whole thinking of like a nodes and modes type of approach, right? So you have these kind of locations of recreation or activity or events or community programming, and then you've got the ability to be able to move between these. So we want to sort of ask the question, try and get some sort of creative thinking and some answers around the distribution of assets across the community, which is what we were just starting to talk about. Then we want to really understand about the connectivity between those recreation nodes. And then we want to have some preliminary forecast of future needs. So, and part of that is to try and get people to be thinking about, well, here's what we kind of want today, but what might we be wanting in 5 years, and what might we be wanting in 10 years, right? And there are kind of things that are driving how some of those future needs might change. So just to give you a bit of a breakdown on this, so from a sort of a context of the survey, the high-level guiding principles. So a lot of that we tried to sort of bake into the white paper. So you looked at that last time, and so you understand the intention of that. So that's one of the kind of levels of guiding principles. Another one really out of the comp plan was connecting to and amplifying the character areas. So sort of thinking about the concentration of community assets in the Hospital Bluff area, thinking about the community oasis, the downtown community oasis, and so on. That ties into the social infrastructure. And then activate previous planning and recommendations, taking into account emerging trends that have been shaped by the pandemic. And actually, one of the things that was really interesting, because sort of in a way we're talking about this sort of bubble of Smithfield, right? And all the eyes are sort of in on that. But just sort of coincidentally, last week so 2 years ago, we held a global think tank on the future of urban living. And that was our consultation at Windsor Castle. And we had a revisit of that on Friday. And we had people from 17 countries, 18 countries, I think, and 5 continents. And they were people who are just all experts in kind of the sort of topic areas we're talking about, but people who are architects and smart city people, people who are talking about public spaces and so on. And we were asking the question about how do we think the pandemic is going to change or shape urban living? So take the case that I know Smithfield sort of sits somewhere in a continuum between a rural area and an urban area, but the reality is that it's, for people who live there, it's more of people are leaning to the urban area, and we took that into account in terms of the peri-urban space. And I think it's been so interesting because my takeaway from that sort of global consultation was that the things we've been talking about in the preparation of particularly the comp plan, but into this Parks and Trails master plan, were really spot on in terms of what people have been talking about at a global context in terms of how the pandemic is shaping the importance of public spaces. And Jim, it just reminds me of, I think, our first call on this project. You were talking about, or maybe it was the comp plan, you're talking about how people were out on the trails in ways that you'd never seen, right? So the importance of public spaces, and we sort of think that that's going to be inelastic. So public spaces have become really important, and people are using them in different ways. And we actually don't see that reversing, right? That was sort of part of the takeaway I had, is that public spaces have been put on the agenda in a way differently, and I don't think they're going to come off that. I don't think people are going to just sort of rush back to the way it was. But Cynthia, because you got to participate in that as well, did you want to just add anything from your takeaway? Because I'm sure you had a very strong Smithfield lens on it when you were in the
right.
discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things and I was actually in a group that talked about the built environment. And one of the things that we talked about was the trends that we saw in Smithfield during the pandemic of, like you talked about with Jim, more people on the trails and a lot of people that weren't necessarily from Smithfield. We were an attraction for those urban dwellers that wanted to get out to nature. And one of the things that we really talked about on Friday that struck me is this was a way for us to be connected in a safe way. You have nature, you have the space, you have that ability, as opposed to the dense populated areas. And so we talked about this in both of the breakouts that I was on. And this is an opportunity for these smaller peri-urban areas who are closer to an urban area to provide that for other residents. And like you said, David, I think there are a lot of things out of the pandemic that probably won't go fully back to normal. And I think this is one, that recognition and understanding of those open spaces and how the built environment can interact with the natural environment.
And the other piece of that too, Cynthia, was that one of the things that people talked a lot about was about trust is one of the big issues that's been really impacted, right? So that human beings don't trust each other as much, or don't trust government, or don't trust what's going on, right? And so these spaces where people can spread out and be able to enjoy themselves, it sort of becomes a very interesting part of your value proposition, and as part of the economic driver that we're talking about in this, is trying to understand what's the economic impact of sort of the parks and trails system. So I think it was kind of all good news in terms of where we're headed. So I just wanted to throw that in, right?
David, today Brittany and I sat in on a kind of a presentation of what parks looks like for the next 10 or so years. And one of the big takeaways was that we had such a huge trend in parks in 2020. We reached out to different communities and said their trail uses tripled in 2020 from 2019. And they're thinking the next 4 years, parks are still going to have that spike, and to prepare for, to be kind of overwhelmed in the parks. But that, that could drop off at one time, but they think it's going to shape up. And Brittany, fill in if anything I missed from that presentation.
No, yeah, I think you covered it. I think he said typically after a pandemic, you see a 400% increase in 4 years. He was assuming it'd be like half that, but I mean, still, he expected to see a huge increase over the next 3 to 5 years, just consistently growing. Like Matt said, there could be a dip in that, and it's probably not just going to continue climbing, but it's good feedback to know that we should expect increased usage and not a decline anytime in the nearest future.
And if you build it for tourism and make it fun, like Bentonville and Rogers have, Rogers is seeing 1,700 cyclists a week now. And when I lived there in 2005, there was I never saw a cyclist ever. So,
and this pandemic really showed that parks are essential. And I hope that, when we, continue to go forward, the sales tax will really help us prepare for what the community wants and the needs that they are, planning for us to bring.
I think we've seen so many new users who've discovered the trails around Smithville and discovered these things. And the word of mouth is still moving around those subjects. And I'm on a couple of Facebook groups, kayaking and mountain biking and stuff. And just the conversations about not just Smithville, but then the local areas that have their small lakes and things and have trails. I think that word of mouth is still going to be blossoming long after we're all back to whatever normal becomes.
Even our recreation has, increasing. We have spring registration open now, and it's numbers that people are signing up a lot earlier than they used to. Everyone's, itching to get back to that normal, as Jim said. So.
Well, I think it's part of that social fabric. Like we said, it's building that interpersonal connectivity that it feels safer outside.
It's almost perfect timing that we're going through this master plan now during this situation than if we would have a couple years earlier. So,
Yeah, because I think, Matt, it gives you a sense of what your future use is going to be, right? And
100%.
And I would probably suggest that if you're talking 3 to 4 years or 3 to 5 years of increased use, I don't think it's going to go back, right? Because that becomes kind of a new pattern. And at the same time, of course, you've got a component of your population which is aging, which is going to be active retirees, right? So I think, I think the use level will stay up. The other part that comes with that, when you start to talk about people coming from the urban space to the peri-urban space for recreation facilities, is the trust factor becomes important as well. So what you'll start to run up against is you'll then start to run up against people who are overusing trails, or there's abusive trails. And so thinking about signage, wayfinding, setting the kind of rules about how people behave, I think is going to be something to think about. So we do a lot of work in outdoor recreation tourism destinations. And so this whole issue about messaging to people before they come about how you should behave when you get there has become really important, because they get all these people who turn up who don't necessarily know what they're doing properly. They're not prepared, so they park in the wrong places, they leave rubbish behind and so on, right? So it's going to come with some challenges as well that I think we have to be thinking about now, so that you don't you don't get into a crisis management mode, but there's a chance now to lay down a plan that thinks about how do you manage higher use. And a lot of those people may not actually be from the community who are using it on a fairly regular basis.
I think that's
Well, David, you hit, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry,
no,
go
I was
ahead,
just
Jim.
going to say that's an excellent observation. And I think that just increases the potential for some good educational programming as well, because I know I do a lot of camping, and I've rebuilt a camper, and I'm in a couple of those kind of groups too. And people talk about that their campgrounds are being destroyed by people who come in. They've gone out and they bought a camper because they want to get outside. They don't really know what they're doing. And they come in and they just really trash the place. And so like you say, the signage and the educational opportunities where Parks and Rec could be doing some programming and things around just education of how to utilize these recreational opportunities.
Well, and sort of informing people what to do. And Matt, I'll send you a link to a project we've just been working on called the Mahusik Way. So it's a small ski area in Western Maine, right? So Sunday River, if you know that kind of part of the world at all.
Yeah.
And so it's a small rural community with a lot of working forests, right? And so we work with them on coming up with this whole notion of a pledge, like Embrace Our Place, but it's all about communicating to visitors and locals about what you should do when you come there, right? So it's a fairly it's a virtual kind of a space, but it's trying to intercept with people before they get there. But it might have some ideas in terms of how you could kind of build this into some of the platforms around the parks and trails and communicating, I guess, the sort of code of conduct almost of, what to do. And I think it ties really well to this notion of Smithfield being a special place and having this, sort of unique position as a sort of a rural community or peri-urban community that sits in the middle of recreation assets, but on the edge of a metropolis. But Matt, if I can send you that link, can you send it out to people on the committee?
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah. And I think it actually has relevance, although that's targeted very much to a ski economy and outdoor recreation. I think there's a lot of parallels, right? All right. So,
I know
sorry.
Cynthia wanted to say something too, but so Cynthia, if you want to go, and then David, I wanted to share my screen real quick to show you.
Yeah, sure. Let me stop mine.
Yeah, no, all I was going to say, both David and Jim had talked on the education and communication, which ties back to Friday as well. We talked about trust and communication to try to enhance that trust. And so that communication perspective was important. So I was just making that linkage.
That's going to tie into that environmental statement that we make about what we want for Smithville too.
Yep, exactly.
So David, I know you love fun with data like I do. So I just had to show you this real quick and for others to see as well, just to kind of see our reach. This is the heat map of race registration.
Okay.
And you can see we even get out here into Pennsylvania. But this is our reach of our cyclists.
Wow.
And then if you look trend line wise, this is comparison of our first year to this year of registrations. People paying money to come ride their bike in Smithville. So, and I have that for all the races, David, if you guys want that data to see kind of the draw.
And actually, I just dropped into the chat the Mahusik Way pledge link, right? Just as a just maybe as an idea, thought starter, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, so yes, if you can share that stuff, that'd be great, man.
Yep, I will.
Okay. All right, so I'll go back to this piece, right? All right, so that's the context, right? So then this is the sort of stuff we're thinking about sort of probing in the community survey, and it's a little bit of a different sort of a approach because we're trying to make sure that the lens is kept wide. So when you're doing like a Parks and Trails master plan, quite quickly it's going to become, or it could easily devolve to be just about Parks and Trails, right? But actually the lens here that people are looking for is a little bit wider, right? And we sort of talked about that really from the visioning onwards. But so the first kind of point we wanted to probe was the distribution of assets across the community. So we were starting to talk about that on the map. And so this kind of really probing here, where should these major nodes be? If we're going to have a distributed recreation concept, that leads to a nodes and modes type of approach, but where should those nodes be? So downtown, near the schools, Smith Forks Park, northern residential character area, southern character area, and so on, right? But really trying to drill in with the community about what's their thoughts about those, because we want people to be thinking about this kind of geographic or this sort of spatial distribution, and then thinking about, okay, how do we easily get from one to the other? Then that leads into really trying to probe what do people think should be in each one of these nodes, right? So we've talked about this notion of theme parks and having kind of specific purposes. But people have talked about things like recreation assets. So, obviously it's sporting fields and things like that, but people have talked a lot about spaces for ecological features, events and festivals, public art and spaces, and so on. But we would want to sort of get the community thinking creatively. And so we were sort of, as we were thinking about the concept plan, for example, one of our discussions last week was talking about just sort of kicking it around, right? So not making any decisions, but just kind of brainstorming. So if you take Heritage Park and you look at where that sits geographically, it's right there potentially as really a critical connector in a whole sort of range of connectivity that feeds into the downtown, but really sits right next to what could be the River Walk and the downtown space. So, and yet you look at what it's being used for, and it's some ballparks and some car parks, right? Essentially, right? So that's the sort of thinking about, okay, well, what's the kind of most exciting use for these different areas, right? When you've got other space, could those ball fields go elsewhere, and they may be closer to where communities are or people live and so on, right? So they're the sort of things we want to probe in this sort of discussion about the distribution of assets across the community. So that's kind of one level. Then the next level is we want to be probing the connectivity between these recreation nodes, and maybe even recreation is not the right word, but between these kind of node areas. So the trails and the multimodal connections. So which are the initial key connections? So trying to understand what Carissa was talking about. So what's the sort of sense of priority of like the River Walk, and then maybe the downtown to the Hospital Bluff, the school area. Is there a different way to create a different kind of an access there to the north and south? What's the sequencing that needs to happen, and what does that look like in terms of the type of trail and what the type of use is? And then there's kind of feeds into the mode of transport, right? Or mode of transit. Biking, walking, scooters, future potential transit modes. What's the purpose of the connectivity in the trails? So recreation, connectivity, safety. I know in the comp planning, the recreation component came out really strong. But I think if people start to truly see what the kind of master plan could look like, the connectivity piece might become much more interesting, right? So if we think about, we might be going into a world where people are thinking about getting to places in different ways. For example, like, I don't know if you saw it, but in New York, they're converting 2 lanes on 2 of the bridges from cars to bikes, right? So that go over the rivers on either side of New York. So this is like just this massive kind of global trend towards, creating more space for different types of connectivity, which is not automobiles, right? And maybe that plays out some ways in Smithville in terms of the connectivity. And then the last part of it is really trying to understand the forecast of needs. So what's the priority? And I think this is a really big question to dig into, is that because we're talking about trails, we're talking about parks, talking about recreation programming, which Brittany does a whole bunch of work on. Then there's the community programming, which is becoming more important. So the festivals and events. What's the relative priority between those, right? And because you can come up with a master plan, but Matt's got to go and deliver it, right? So what's the trade-off between all these components, and where does the effort go? And then what is the timeline for that? So the sequence of investments, how do you coordinate around the regional assets? So, so that's sort of because there's a lot going on around Smithville, of course. Tipping points and thresholds, and I think we were just talking about one of those in terms of, significant bump in use, and does that go back to that lower level of use, or does it stay up at that high level? And do you need to be planning for that higher impact on your facilities? And then there's also the changing needs and anticipated interests that may evolve over time. So, is there a trend away from organized recreation into self-organized recreation and so on, right? So that's the basic structure we were looking at for the that we wanted to really probe in this next phase. So wanted to get your reactions to that. Do you think we're kind of hitting the right pieces there, or do you think we're missing stuff? Obviously, there's going to be detail as people like cascade down into that, into the survey and discussion boards and so on. But really our premise for this is we want to be leading the community through this bigger conversation. So we're not just talking about a ball field, we're really talking about this sort of whole future sort of system and approach to recreation and connectivity in the community. So kind of probably much bigger than a traditional, or a bigger lens than a traditional sort of park and rec plan. But I think you're at that point, right? That's the sort of the thesis that we've got. So I wanted to seek your reaction on the approach we're talking about. Do you think we're on the right track with that? Do you have any kind of thing, do you think where there are gaps or things we haven't thought about that should be in there?
I think you're on the right track personally. The thing I would also add is if we look at some of this connectivity and we look at it from the lens of alternative transportation and not just recreation, that could open up some potential funding that in grants that maybe we wouldn't get otherwise. I know in Tennessee, we did some work with Rails to Trails, and that was a big funding source for Rails to Trails was alternative transportation. And I know in the initial visioning, we did identify the number of people that work and live in Smithville, and it's small, but we still, increasing that potential for people to be able to ride their bikes to work and maybe, again, once we do get some level of safe connectivity, to be able to commute in alternative transportation.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Other comments? Do you think we're on the right track? I'm going to take silence as total agreement, just so you know, right? So that's our default, right?
And David, and Cynthia may be able to help with this question too. As we get these survey results back and we see kind of where the priority from the community is, this would probably impact, where that park and Stormwell sales tax would come into play, correct? And kind of what that year to year would look like with sharing those funds.
Yeah, and can I just jump in there, Matt, too? Because there's sort of two pieces coming in on this.
Yeah.
One is, what does things cost, right? So what can you reasonably do? But then there's, what's the appetite to think about additional funding to it? So that's, you're not necessarily locked into that one funding stream or that one amount. So it's trying to understand appetite and what's the payoff for the investment.
Yeah. I'm definitely really interested to see kind of where priorities go, and I'm ready to see those results for sure. So
yeah, I mean, we passed the park sales tax last summer, and we did the infrastructure one 2 years prior, right? So I think the improvements are wanted, and we need to put money into it, but it's also given us the opportunity to apply for grants that in the past we didn't have, right? Because we didn't have those funding sources. So
having this master plan completed will be a big asset.
Not only do we not have the funding sources, but we didn't have a plan. We didn't have a vision of where we wanted things to be. So tying it all together and our local commitment to it.
Right, and we're already $1.3 million into just grant funds right now, right? So nearly that, right? It's between Mark and RTP, and RTP one, right? You can apply for multiple times, Matt. And then we've looked at those other ones, right, for playgrounds and other things. So,
actually, RTP had reached out to us and wanted us to look at applying this year. We just really didn't. We wanted to get this process to know what our goals were and what we needed to be looking at.
And that's awesome. And Diamond Crest Trail would be a great one to throw at that if it was eligible, or
I think that's the wonderful thing about this, helping us determine those priorities is what the community wants in that.
Yep. Yeah, RTP is a great thing, and then there's some of the Missouri specific ones for playgrounds and things like that too that we've looked at, and then things like some of the things that came up on, I think a couple times on the survey, I think Danny has seen on social media. There's organizations out there that build things like skate parks. There's private money. There's skaters that build that kind of stuff for communities. So it opens us up to be able to look at that kind of stuff too, and submit on those types of grants as well.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, I was going to mention, just with kind of with the whole pandemic thing and talking about the trails and that kind of thing, I do know that, like, from what I understand from some friends over in Platte City, they've got a bigger skate park than what we have, and it's definitely utilized more often. But that's something that, like, we have, from what I understand from quite a few people who skate here in town, like, it's not, ours is not up to snuff. Apparently it's not a good park. I don't skate myself, so I wouldn't know.
It's about 25, 30 years old. It's very outdated.
Yeah, well, Platte City also, theirs is kind of portable, and you got to remember, the thing with Platte City too is they've got Platte County, which has a great parks and program that's very well funded. So some of that stuff is not just Platte City's, and they've got 20 fast food restaurants right in an intersection that help drive sales tax.
Well, and really where I was going with that is just, it may be something that we've not necessarily taken seriously up to this point, but with the pandemic, I do know, like, I know on TikTok right now, like, people getting into skating is a big deal, and not rollerblading, like 4-wheel skating, the good old fashioned kind. And so, like, that's just something that might be another thing that we look towards, that these trails are a good thing, not just for bikes, but they're good for people on skates. They're good for people on skateboards. And that's definitely something that people are going to be using outside of just bikes and walking the trails. So
Yeah.
There's a couple teenage girls that skate downtown that I see quite a bit. And, my sister was a skater forever. We built a half pipe for her at the house, and I get it. It's definitely something, but yeah, I'm just saying, if we get this stuff on the plan and we identify some funding for it, we can go out and apply for grants for those specific type things that aren't going to be a federal or a state type grant. They're going to be private charity type of things.
And if I can also, to kind of pull it back in the thought process of survey, and I'm looking at Josie's square on this. I'm going to personally ask Josie for help in making sure that we get the word out when the survey is there, to ensure that we get the voice of the teen population, the high school cohort, and youth. Skateboard park, maybe think about that, but there are lots of things that we want to make sure that your voices are heard in this.
No,
So
yeah.
any other
Oh,
thoughts?
sorry, Dave.
Yeah.
No, I don't skate myself, but I do know a couple people who do skate here in town, and I don't really know what all the stuff is, but I know that they'd rather go to places like Edgerton to skate. So I think that's definitely something that we should look into, just from my teenage perspective. I'm not very educated on skating, but yeah.
So, but I think what we have to be really careful on this, right, is that, you can pick any type of activity, right? And there'll be, a group that'll be interested in it, right? But in this plan, we have to be thinking about this whole raft of kind of community events. There's, recreation programming, there's, parks and their uses, their trails and how they might be used. There's the different types of, there's a really wide swath here, right? And so it's not going to deliver everything to everybody, I don't think, right? So part of it has to be to really understand, what are the core top priorities, and how do you build in the ability to have flexibility over time? You don't want to put a whole bunch of money into something that goes out of fad, a year later, right? So I think there's sort of some kind of deeper thinking here. We want to try and probe with the community to really understand what's the kind of the appetite going forward, right? But I think that's where we need to list out what are all the different types of things, and ask people, well, what are you interested in now, and what might you be interested in 5 years and in 10 years, so we get a bit of a sense of how desires or needs might be evolving over time. But other thoughts? Do you think we're on the right track? Again, silence will be complete affirmation, right?
Go for it, man. I trust your surveys.
All right, good.
We've only hired you 3 times now.
Yeah, that's right. So, all right. So it's a different approach, but we wanted to kind of do it from that cascade down. But we do want it to provoke thinking in the community, to be really thinking about, we don't want it to just, turn into, oh yeah, I want the trail out the front door of my house done first, right? We want people to be thinking about a community-wide systemic system that might take 10 or 20 years to build or put in place, but everyone's kind of got the shared vision of it. And I think that's where thinking around what are these key nodes and how do we connect those becomes really important. So what does the downtown become? What is, is there the potential like for something abutting there or with the school, right? In terms of, leveraging off their amenities, Smith Fork Park, what could be there, right? So, and then how do you get people into those key nodes, I think is part of what's really exciting as a potential here. Carissa or Joel, do you want to just jump in on this too? Because I know we've been kicking around this sort of thinking about this sort of concept plan together.
I don't think we have anything to add at this point in time. Next week internally, we're going to start looking at all of those programming elements that you guys are talking about so that we can get a list in front of you all and think about how we want to look at them in the overall system. That's our next immediate step before we start the master vision planning and sketching. So,
yeah. And David, one thing I'd like to see as part of this, as we come up with, kind of this timeline, punch list objectives type stuff that we did in the comp plan, time-based and task-based, overlay that with this. And then once we do transportation master plan, but also, have that list. So when developers come in and we work on their development agreements, we know that, if there's a trail going to go in there, they have that outlined ahead of time and we can point to it pretty quickly and say, well, if you're going to build a subdivision there, this is the piece of trail you need to build. It just makes it really clear and easy to read, just like with the comp plan.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we were starting to, so Matt and Jack and I have been talking about that as well. So getting that in there.
I'd really like to see design standards when we do things, when we start talking, I know it's not the favorite thing for everyone to talk about, but Cynthia loves, sewer and water treatment. When we talk about bathrooms, we don't just say a bathroom. We make sure we say we want a year-round, accessible, that's got design elements that fit into that natural surrounding, not a concrete box sitting on a platform that doesn't really match anything, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because that goes to signage, that goes to, how businesses can sign, height, and all those standards you see in a lot of communities where, when you're driving into a community where they don't have any tall signs, and so I just think that consistency really does.
Right.
I think it's good to have that across the board like that.
Yeah, because if you look at the sign at like Harbor Lakes where you have a giant boulder that's carved into, right? That's not going anywhere anytime soon, and it looks nice. It's not a piece of plywood that's laminated and thrown up on some 2x4s that are going to get blown over every time we get a heavy wind. So,
okay.
Yeah, it might cost a little more, but we would rather spend it once than 10 times.
Right.
I think Matt spent $1,000 on zip ties just for wildfire this month. Every time I drive by, it gets busted.
All right. So and if thoughts come up, just feel free to send those through, right? Either via Matt or direct, if you like. Any other business before I hand it back? So Danny, I think back to you.
All right, guys. Good meeting, David, everybody. Thanks so much for everything. I need a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Well,
I would motion we adjourn.
But before that, new business, I want to bring this up because our next meeting, we do have another meeting come up, but we are looking for volunteers for the bike race. We're also looking for sponsors. Matt and Brittany, you're going to get that calendar, that sponsorship document out. We'd love to see the Parks Board there and help and, encourage the community. It is our biggest fundraiser of the year now, our income source when it comes to parks. I think last year, Matt, what did we bring in profit-wise on the September race?
Just under 5,000, I believe.
Oh.
And we're trending towards doubling that for May. So it's a good time. It's fun. Encourage people to come downtown, and it's spread out enough so that you don't have to be there long. You can at least see a little bit and encourage people. And if you sign up, you volunteer, you get a shirt. It's a good thing. Matt needs help. Britt needs help. It's good. And you can be out on the course. You don't have to be downtown. You can be out on the course ringing cowbells if you want to be socially distant. Stay in your car, honk your horn. It's a 200-mile course. You got plenty of places to go. That's all I got.
Anybody else for new business?
I move to adjourn.
Second? Thanks. All right, guys. Well, you guys have a good night, and I will see you all next month. I believe is the, hold on, was that the 25th? Are we redoing this the 25th again?
Yep. The fourth Thursday.
25th?
Yep.
Cool. All right, perfect. Thanks,
Great
guys.
meeting.
We'll see you later.